Hey, this is Keith with How to Build Your Own Home. I wanted to show you something really cool on some very old buildings and why I think the way I think based upon these two old buildings. When I go to the second building, I'll actually tell you where I am and what I learned from these two buildings. We're here at a very old reconstruction of an old pioneer home. This is not the original, but they actually recreated to look like the original from the 1830s. And you notice it's pretty much just all timber, and they did some tooling, um, which they call pointing. This is called pointing. This is not actual mud. This is a synthetic that they put in here. But back in the 1830s, they would literally just fill this up with mud, and then they would set the wood on there. But this, the original, did not last very long, and you can tell that this here won't last very long either. We're in a very humid environment with a lot of rain, 4 seasons of snow, very extreme temperatures, very extreme weather. But you'll see also that this building is right on the ground. So that the timber is right sitting on the ground there. And the reconstruction of this was put on a foundation, but the original was just timbers put right on the ground. And as a result, you've got moisture working and wicking itself up into the substrate, termites, all kinds of problems with that build. And this kind of structure does not last very long, not long at all. But it was an efficient way to build back in the day. But let me show you another home from somebody that we know in American history, and I'll show you the difference. Let's go to the next one. Okay, here we are. I'm in front of another different type of building. That is the original from the 1830s. And you can see there the difference. This is a brick home, beautiful brick home. And I'll show you the actual creator and owner of this brick home. But I want you to look at the foundation here. The foundation is really the key there. That there is made of shell. And about 20, 30 feet down from this property is just a shell base. This entire community was originally built on a really swampy foundation, but they found the shell way down deep and they brought that back up. Now, a lot of the homes that were built, or the buildings that were built, we can see some over here as well. And I'll tell you where I am here in just a little bit. The ones that lasted a very long time, we're now upwards of almost 200 years where some of these buildings have been here. But this original part here has been here for that long. This was an addition. It was actually redone and refabricated to match the original, to go along with the history, kind of keep the history alive. But what I wanted to communicate here is that your foundation should be rock or concrete. It should never be wood or lumber, or even the wood or the substrate of timber should not be really close to the ground like that. You're asking for trouble. Here's the other thing that I learned when I studied pioneer homes and pioneer building. Old, really stuff that's been around for a long time. These homes were drafty. In fact, we've pointed this or put some mortar in the brick here, but the original foundation was just shell laid on top of shell laid on top of shell. There was no mortar between that at all. In fact, when it would rain, a lot of times water would get into the crawl space of these homes, and it would actually percolate and go through the ground. The good thing is there's constant air movement underneath that home through the foundation. So the above part, all the timbers inside this home, were protected, and it never really got wet, never got moisture wicking from the ground up into the main structure of the home. Now, let me show you where I am. I'm not in Kansas anymore. I'm several hundred miles away from where I typically build. I'm back east right now, and we are at the original Jonathan Browning gunsmith. This is where the famous Browning guns were originated, and this was his gunsmithing operation. Right in here, he actually fabricated guns by design, handmade in that building. And this is where he really started his operation. I happen to be in what's called Nauvoo, Illinois, and this here is basically an old pioneer settlement started by the Mormons back in the 1830s. And a lot of these buildings are the very same buildings that you see in Utah. In fact, I actually live in a 1919 Pioneer home. And when I came out here, I actually saw the same structure, the same design that I actually live in. And I learned a lot about home construction, lasting quality, by how the pioneers built. And they didn't think like we think today of sealing up our homes so much that we run the risk of cold air condensing issues and moisture not finding a way out. They actually built homes so that moisture could come through and dry out, get wet, dry out. I've seen some wood and some structures that would get wet and dry over decades and it still be preserved. The challenge you have is if something gets wet, how fast can it dry off? And if it can dry off pretty quick, it's going to last a long time. If it cannot dry off pretty quick, it's going to rot. It's going to build up bacteria and it's going to build up termite problems, you name it. It's going to rot away and it's not going to last a long time. This is really where I started learning about construction, is how people dealt with water issues, how people dealt with moisture, and how to keep it away from the timber structure so that it can actually dry. So very interesting. If you've never been out here to this area in Illinois, I strongly recommend visiting what's called Nauvoo, Illinois. It has retained a lot of the original structures here. This was an actual small town, a settlement, a religious settlement, and they have the original post office there. They also have the original printing press in that building. I learned something in that printing press as a tour earlier today. That phrase, mind your P's and Q's. Well, when you print something, you have to put the typeset upside down, and oftentimes people would confuse the P's and Q's because they would be upside down. So when they said, mind your P's and Q's, that's what that means, you know. And the skip to the chase, interesting phrase. There's a long column that would often be put in printers and printing presses for just a column issue. Well, if they didn't want it to be in the short version of that, they wanted it in the larger print face. Skip to the chase, meaning the larger section. Let's skip to that. Don't give me the nits and bitsies of something. Like, give me the big thing, and I'll skip to that. So very interesting things. And then there was another interesting phrase. I can't remember what that phrase was. It was an interesting tour. Again, if you've never been here to Nauvoo, Illinois, I recommend it highly. You'll learn a lot about American history, about religious history, about what people went through to hold their beliefs, their religious beliefs, and the sacrifices they made. What's interesting is just a little history here. Can't help myself on this channel to give you a little history, but the people here were run out of town, basically, and there's a street down here, not down this one, but the next one over, and the locals here didn't like how fast this community was growing, and so they basically ran them out of town. They killed the religious leader, which happened to be Joseph Smith. He was martyred about 30 minutes from here in a place called Carthage, Illinois. And about 2 years, roughly about a year and a half to 2 years after he was martyred, the people were run out of town. So about a couple of streets that way, they lined up in February, February, dead of winter, and they built wagons. And they exited this town, and just to the west here, about a quarter mile or so, is the Mississippi River. And they crossed the Mississippi and they headed west, and they went hundreds and hundreds of miles, made it all the way to a place called Salt Lake City, which of course many of you know about. And those people carried their artisanship, their craftsmanship, their ability to build and construct all the way out west, and influenced a lot of history all along the way. So, and I'm kind of part of that. I got a little bit of that knowledge and a little bit of that understanding about construction, and it didn't just start here. went all the way to Independence, Missouri, all the way up to Palmyra, New York, and a lot of different places along the eastern United States. So we get our knowledge from a long history that comes from a lot of sources. So that's why I believe in letting a home breathe to some degree. I'm not a fan of sealing it up unless you really, really, really know what you're doing and you've got some experience and you've got some failure under your belt, and that failure has told you, I better not seal it up. Again, it's just like a Band-Aid on a sore. If you look at a Band-Aid, it's perforated. A Band-Aid's got holes in it so that sore can heal. It's the same thing with a coat in the wintertime. I mentioned this many times. If you're out working and doing a lot of work, you don't want to seal up that coat. You want it to breathe. Otherwise, it's going to sweat. And when it sweats, here's something to think about. Have you ever taken off your coat and you're sweating and you get into the winter time and then you start to shiver and you get really, really cold? That's when you can develop hyperthermia. And that's when some real problems can happen. Buildings are a lot the same way. They're like human beings. And I dress them and I build them as if they're a part of my soul, a part of my building, part of my own life and how I want to live and how I want to breathe. I want air in and through my home. I don't want to lose energy. I don't want to build like that. But at the same time, all the risky spots, the risky places, I want to make sure that those risky places are going to breathe. And that's how I try to build. Hope this was helpful for you on a little tour here. I'm going to pick up some other ideas about construction, ways that last. And right there, that old structure right there, the straight up wood with mud, it's not going to last, especially when it's sitting right on the ground. You want to have your foundation as solid as it possibly can be. And the best foundations are either a rock base or a concrete. And you lift that home, you get that home out of the dirt, and trust me, it's gonna last a long time. I still see builders today building stem walls, and they actually have less than a foot of clearance from the dirt and the floor. That means all that buildup of moisture is really close to your substrate. They're going to run a problem all that. So be cautious, learn. This is Keith with How to Build Your Home. I'm going to go back onto my tour and I'll show you some more as we head through the eastern parts of the United States. You guys take care.